Hello everyone and welcome to a really fun game from round 15 of yesterday's Steinitz Memorial. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Alexander Grischuk and well, let's just dive straight into it. So Magnus opens with e4 and Grischuk goes for c5, the Sicilian defense. We have knight f3, d6 and bishop to b5 with check. So the canal attack, we have knight to d7 and c3 now, preparing to strike in the center with d4, but knight f6 going after the e4 pawn, and now queen to e2, defending the e4 pawn. We have a6, asking do you want to trade or go back with the bishop, and Magnus goes back. We have bishop to a4, b5, further expanding on the queen side, and the bishop back to c2 now. We have bishop to b7, adding another attacker to the e4 pawn, and Magnus just castles here. We have g6 by Grischuk, and d4 now, as the e4 pawn is nicely protected. We have bishop to g7, and there are a few moves that are known here in the database, but b3, the move Carlsen plays, is a new move in the position, so already as of move 10 we have a completely new game. We have castles by Grischuk and bishop to b2, continuing development, and now e5, going after that d4 pawn. We have d5, Magnus decides to close the center, and now knight to h5, shifting the knight over to f4, but also maybe making room for the f pawn. So g3, not allowing knight f4, and now knight to b6. We have a4, kind of trying to gain more control of the c4 square, but black just continues with f5. And here c4, now threatening to win the b5 pawn. B captures on c4, we have b captures on c4, and now pushing the pawn further with f4. And here Magnus goes for a5, asking Grischuk, what do you want to do here? Do you want to go back with the knight? Or maybe go for something else. Now, the critical idea is f captures on g3, which is very complicated and maybe requires a bit too much calculation for a blitz game. Point being that after the knight is captured, you can go knight f4, attack the queen, and after the queen moves, you go g2. But it's really complicated and it's hard to evaluate who comes up on top here. For example, knight h3 check, you give up the pawn, and now queen d7 defends the knight going to g4, and it's, well, really complicated. So instead, Grischuk first moves the knight with knight to d7, and now g4, no longer allowing this idea. Knight back to f6, and now even g5. The pawn on g5 is a bit advanced, but is protected by the knight, so it's not a problem. Knight to h5, and now king to h1, making room for the rook to come to the g file if needed. We have rook to f7 by Grischuk, and knight b to d2 now, continuing development, and now h6, going after that g5 pawn, so rook to g1, adding another defender, and here Grischuk should have gone for king to h7, but it's really hard to realize why from this position. Grischuk instead added another defender to the g6 pawn, this way with knight to f8. However, this loses the game on the spot, but it's a really tricky tactic, so feel free to pause the video and try to figure out how to win this with white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the idea, as it's not an easy move to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's g captures on h6. Point being, you want to get the bishop away from the g file, so this all nicely connects. Point is that now obviously you have to do something, either moving the bishop or capturing, it doesn't really matter, but you have to move the bishop away from the g file. So here Grischuk captured it, and now comes knight captures on e5, opening up an attack towards the knight. So here you capture it or you don't. For example, if you capture it with d captures on e5, then comes queen captures on h5, and now everything is hanging. This is hanging, this is hanging, this is hanging, and there's just no good way to play this. Bishop g7, you can even give up the exchange here with captures, captures, and captures, and it's just going to be impossible to play this. Rook is coming to g1, the bishop can capture on e5. As this bishop is pinned, the knight can easily come into the game, and it will just be over very quickly. So instead, after knight captures on e5, Grischuk threw in a knight Zwischenzug with f3, attacks Carlsen's queen, but now Carlsen doesn't move the queen, but rather continues with knight captures on f7. So okay, f captures on e2, and now knight captures on d8. We have rook captures on d8, and now knight to f3. And if we look at what's happening on the board, it seems that Magnus has won a pawn, but it's hard to decide whether this pawn will remain here for very long. and also he's up the exchange. So bishop to c8, and now comes rook 8 to e1, going after the e2 pawn with knight to f4 defending, but now bishop to c1, preparing to remove the defender of the pawn, king f7, and now knight to g5 with check. Here Magnus forces the trade because of bishop captures on f4 on the next move, so captures, rook captures on g5, and now knight to h3, attacking the rook and the pawn, but Magnus not really worried about it, goes rook to g3, gives up the f2 pawn with check, king g2, and now knight back to g4. But now the bishop also retreats to b2, grabbing hold of this diagonal, and we have rook to e8. Putting more pressure to the e-file, but now finally rook captures on e2. We have knight to e5 by Grischuk, but now rook to f2 with check. King g7, and now rook g to f3, saying that, okay, your knight is pinned, you cannot capture my rook, I'm gonna go rook to f7, check next. So we have knight to d7, getting the other knight into the game, hoping maybe to trade off some rooks here along the f-file, but now bishop to a4. You could go rook to f7 check right away, but Magnus goes for bishop to a4 right away, now adding another pin into the game. We have king to h6 unpinning, but now rook h3 check. King g7, and now bishop captures on d7. We have bishop captures, and only now rook back to f3 as the knight is still pinned. So king back to h6, and only now does Magnus capture. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now it's two rooks against the rook and the bishop, where Magnus is still up a pawn. So it's not very challenging, but okay, rook f4 defending the pawn. And bishop to a4 now. We have rook to b2, now shifting the rook the other way around, and king to h5. We have rook to b8, and here g5, forcing the rook to move to capture the e4 pawn, but Magnus says it's not a problem. Rook f6, which prevents the king from going back with king to g6. Here Grischuk captured on e4, but it simply doesn't work, so feel free to pause the video here and try to find the winning move for white. While I give you a couple of seconds, it's actually a forced mate in 2, so have at it. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting rook h8, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, yep, that's the idea. So rook to h8 with check, and it was in this position that Alexander Grischuk resigned the game, as after king to g4, which is the only move, you get pawn to h3, and that is checkmate since, well, the black king has nowhere to go. So yeah, after rook h8 check, Grischuk resigned, and yet another victory for Magnus in the Steinitz Invitational, Steinitz Memorial, sorry, not Invitational. And just so I don't forget, here are the final standings of the Steinitz Memorial after 3 days of play. Cross table from chess24. Carlsen wins the tournament with two whole points ahead of everyone else, followed by Daniil Dubov with 10 and Peter Svidler with 9.5. And then, as follow, Shahriar Mamedyarov, Jeffrey Shiong, Lekwang Liam, Bu Xianji, Anton Korobov, David Anton Giharo, and in last place, incredibly, Alexander Grischuk, obviously not his tournament. But yeah. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow we are starting the Lindores Abbey Rapid Tournament. Players will play 4 games a day, so it's going to be a lot of action. I don't know how many games I'll cover, but if they're interesting, probably more than one. So I would like to thank Eric Monroy, Kyle Worlitz, Martin Buta, Mark Abbott, and Tiana Marine Fisher for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Morphy Saga and whatever else happens in the chess world. Like I said, the Lindores Abbey Chess Rapid Tournament is starting tomorrow. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. And have an excellent rest of your day.